Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 48 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another episode. Before we get started, just a few reminders. If you are interested in possibly having your own true crime story read on the bonus episodes that will roll out this fall, you can email the story to thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com with the subject of listener files. Some examples could be like hometown murders and how they impacted you or your family, family-involved true crime, also true crime stuff that maybe has happened to you, like a robbery, a break-in, any true crime. It doesn't have to be murder. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening on. The reviews and rates help boost TheKillFile on the true crime lists so that other people can find us. It is one of the absolute best ways that you can help support TheKillFile. Also, thank you to those of you who share, like, or even comment on TheKillFile social media posts. It helps spread the word. I read them, so keep it up. Don't forget to hit the download button on this episode to let us know how many listeners that we have and to help us get some sponsors. Finally, just check out the website and merch by going to thekillfile.com where you can learn more about me and how TheKillFile got started. You can also click Shop Merch for some fun true crime merch or just suggest a case right there on the website. Okay, that's it for today's business. Let's talk about today's case. I found this guy's name in a book that I have about serial killers and decided to cover him before I even found out that one of his victims is a well-known fashion designer. Today we are going to cover the case of Andrew Cunanan. Trigger warnings for today are going to be brutality, murder, and suicide. Here we go. The year is 1997. The place, Miami, Florida. People from all over were starting to flock to an up-and-coming place of glamorous playboys, celebrities, nightclubs, and nightlife. The Miami Herald would speak to the fact that there was a venue seemingly on every single block, and the clubs in South Beach were known to light up the night sky in the 90s. John Pacenti, a journalist familiar with Miami in that era, would say that there was little innocence left in the area, as it was known to be a wild scene where people hooked up and any sexual orientation was seemingly welcome. As people were coming from all over wanting to be part of the culture and nightlife, hotel prices that were once the cheapest around shot up, and the local economy was boosting from the newfound importance of the area. Not only were celebrities making their way to the Miami area, but fashion designers like Gianni Versace made it seem like the place to be. Everyone knew the Versace name. Gianni Versace was known to be worn by anyone and everyone, from film stars to royalty. In a book written about Andrew Cunanan titled Death at Every Stop and written by author Winsley Clarkson, which I did not read, but he was interviewed in a video that I had watched about these events on Absolute Crime. I was actually able to get like a preview of about 38 pages from the book, which it did seem like a good one, so check it out if you're interested. Clarkson went on to describe Ocean Drive in Miami Beach as one of the most famous streets out there in the district. A popular place called News Cafe located on Ocean Drive was a place that many well-to-do people who lived in the area would help bring out of depreciation. One such regular customer of the News Cafe was the one and only Gianni Versace. On July 15, 1997, Versace walked the few blocks from his multi-million-dollar house, where many tourists and visitors would famously stop in front of to get a picture at the home that Versace built. On this particular morning, Versace walked as he normally did to get his usual magazines, and on his way back to his home on Ocean Drive, something horrific would happen on his front steps. At around 8:55 a.m., Versace was taking his keys out to unlock the front gate to gain access to his multi-million-dollar house, when a young man in his late 20s would walk up behind him, exchange a few words, and then shoot Gianni Versace in the head at point-blank range. He would then bend over and put another bullet into the head of his victim with his .40 caliber gun. The 911 call that would follow was from a frantic man who had seen the crime happen and would tell the dispatcher that someone had shot Versace on his own steps and to please hurry, and then wondered who would do such a thing. When authorities arrived to the scene, they would describe the fact that there was blood everywhere, magazines on the ground, as well as bullet casings. The responsible party for the murder of Versace, a man named Andrew Cunanan, had escaped by fleeing north on Ocean Drive. As TV crews descended on the scene and into the area, police were already out looking for the man responsible, where a manhunt would ensue. Gianni Versace, turns out, was actually not the first nor the second, but rather the fifth victim of Andrew Cunanan, who had recently turned into a brutal spree killer that had been on a 3-month-long, 5-state murderous spree that would end with Versace. So, who was Andrew Cunanan? Andrew Cunanan was born on August 31st, 1969 in National City, California, and he was born the youngest of 4 children, Christopher, Elena, Regina, and then Andrew. His father, Modesto Cunanan, was a Filipino man who had apparently been in the Navy as an officer at some point, but then had been working as a stockbroker. Cunanan's mother, a 30-year-old woman named Marianne Shalaki, was said to be a deeply religious woman in Catholicism and took Andrew to Mass often since he had been little. Cunanan's father was said to be a disciplinarian, however, he was not a violent man, and in fact, it was said by one source that Cunanan didn't experience the more typical childhood trauma that many murderers may experience. Some sources differ on the point of whether his father was a violent man. According to Death at Every Stop, Cunanan, by the age of 6, was able to read the Bible from one cover to the other, and by the age of 10 would regularly read the encyclopedia at bedtime, which, how boring for a child. I hope that was his choice and not forced upon him. It probably goes without saying that Cunanan would end up being smarter than the average bear. When Cunanan was in 3rd grade, he was said to have an IQ of 147, which is pretty damn smart. Marianne was said to be a doting mother, and somewhere along the way, the family would be able to move out of their very modest home to a slightly nicer place, when Marianne would inherit some money from her father. However, the family was not made of money by any means. Modesto Cunanan was said to have encouraged his children to be status conscious, meaning that status mattered to Modesto, and this would pass along to Andrew as well. Modesto was also known to have instilled a sense of confidence in Andrew as a young boy. Cunanan would realize at some point that he was gay, and it was said that actually by the age of 13, he had experienced his first sexual experience with an older boy that he had met in a park in San Diego. Cunanan was not ashamed of the experience, and one source would say that he proudly told some of his classmates about the experience, and at 13 was open about being gay. I'm not saying that anyone should have their first sexual experience at 13. I personally feel that it's way too young, but I will say in this part alone, good for him for being unapologetically himself and unashamed of his own sexuality. Too bad he becomes a giant piece of shit. Being as smart as he was, he could have went on to do much better things with his brain. In Death at Every Stop, Clarkson speaks to the fact that Cunanan had, at the age of 14, started a sexual relationship with a man that was much older than he was, and instead of openly sharing his experiences as he usually did without shame to shock his friends, this time he kept the identity of this older man more of a secret. Cunanan would eventually tell his friends that this older man was married and had children, which is why he was so secretive about the relationship. This relationship was Cunanan's first experience with an older lover, buying everything for him from very nice meals at fancy-ass places to expensive jewelry and watches, which makes me kind of sad for young Cunanan who hasn't done anything wrong yet, and yet this seemingly much, much older man is taking advantage of a 14-year-old gay child, really, and that in itself is probably confusing and traumatic in its own right if Cunanan was only 14. Cunanan would end up attending a high school named the Bishop's High School, and this was a wealthy seaside community in La Jolla, San Diego. A friend of Cunanan's, whose name was Matthew Rafat, would say that his parents, Marianne and Modesto, seemed to want their children to have a better life than they had in the country that they came from, so they almost had a subservient attitude towards their children, or at least towards Andrew. The high school that Cunanan had attended was for the wealthier, so the fact that it was quite a strain for Cunanan's parents financially just to pay for her school was something that Cunanan didn't think that the richer kids around him would notice. The school was apparently around $7,000 a year for tuition, and luckily for the family, Andrew would turn out to be very bright and very determined with a near photographic memory. Cunanan was not only extremely handsome, some would say striking, in fact, but he was also charismatic, coupled with the fact that his parents had told him that he was more special and deserving than most, pushing the fact that they thought one day he would be rich and maybe even famous. Cunanan used his good looks and charm to manipulate people. One source would say that not only were his parents subservient, but also very submissive to the point where they gave him the master bedroom of their home and let him have his own bathroom and even bought him a sports car. It almost gives me the feeling that his parents were kind of banking on the fact that he might go far in life, and maybe they thought that if they catered to him, that it would help him be successful. But as a parent myself, I can't imagine what that would do to a child and how bad that kid could end up if you are subservient to your own child. I mean, it's one thing to be supportive and helpful and reward hard work for your kids, but in my own opinion, you aren't doing your kids any favors by catering to them in such a huge way. The master bedroom, what kind of an example is that setting? That's crazy to me. No wonder he used what he had to manipulate people. Cunanan was also known to have created stories about himself or his life to make people around him think that he had come from a higher status than he really did, which to me is kind of a kid thing. Like, I think a lot of kids want to seem like they have more than they really do to other kids because it can be kind of embarrassing if other kids know that your family is struggling. So I can imagine attending a fancy pants high school like that. It would be even worse for him. Modesto and Mary Ann's marriage would start to collapse while Mary Ann would suffer from chronic depression due to some of the verbal abuse that she was receiving from Modesto. This was said to be part of the reason that Cunanan lied about how great his life was as a way to deal with the stresses from his home life. Professor Craig Jackson, a criminal psychologist, which we've actually heard from on other cases, would attest that Cunanan's psychopathic tendencies actually started at a younger age. He spoke to the fact that Cunanan had become adept at changing who he was to fit into whatever reality he would find himself in. It would be known that Cunanan was good at finding older lovers of a certain means that would introduce him to the richer people to rub elbows with, and would also spoil him with lavish gifts. Not only would this cause Cunanan to think himself more beautiful than anyone around, but this would feed into his need to be loved by everyone and turn everyone's head as he walked by. In the year of 1988, Modesto would abandon his family when Cunanan was 19 years old. He allegedly fled to the Philippines after being suspected of possible embezzlement of around $100,000. After promising the family more money than they would actually get, he convinced them to sell the house while he announced that he was moving to the Philippines. Modesto apparently asked Cunanan if he wanted to go with him, which he had been tempted to do. The same year that Modesto had left his family, Cunanan had spent even more time partying at gay clubs, which he was fond of, but his mother was not. Cunanan had actually been tempted to go with his father to Manila because apparently at this point he was so well known within the San Diego gay community that he was kind of wanting a fresh start, but ultimately Cunanan decided to stay in San Diego until the house was sold, and then he would fly to the Philippines. When the sale of the house had gone through, it only left the family with $3,000. So not only did Modesto leave his family, but he left them with nothing. It was said that Mary Ann was disgruntled and irate after her husband up and left them and was deceitful about the money that they would receive. I can imagine that she was hurt and angry and maybe not in a good headspace on top of never accepting Cunanan's sexuality. An argument would actually break out on one particular occasion where Cunanan's mother was disapproving of his lifestyle, and during the argument, things would turn physical. Cunanan would throw his mother up against a wall, and this would dislocate her shoulder. Cunanan's schoolwork, while now attending the University of Southern California in San Diego, was half-assed, to say the least, or he wouldn't even turn it in at all. He was caught up, maybe even obsessed, with the party scene and keeping his reputation as a party animal in the gay community of San Diego. Cunanan's friend Matt Rafat would say that being gay was a part of Cunanan's identity, and at the very fibers of who he was could be compared to like a Liberace or an Elton John in a way. Matt would say that Andrew Cunanan was the center of the universe on their campus and was a, quote, giant explosion of personality. It was said that Cunanan learned from an early age that things would come easy to him if he could find and hook up with the right people, aka sugar daddies, who were willing to pay for things for such young and handsome lovers on their arm. Cunanan learned to adapt, lie, and spin stories to manipulate the people that he was around or make them believe that he came from a family or situation that he did not, to get what he wanted from them or to have them see him in a certain light. A friend would later say that although they never knew Cunanan to have or hold a job, they often saw him with wads of cash to buy everyone's drinks. He was always dressed well and was very put together. Sadly, Cunanan would tell a friend that there were a few occasions that he had been forced to take part in a sadomasochistic role and in various bondage experiences. He would later say that these types of beatings that were forced upon him as sexual play reminded him of what his own father had done to him, which so many sources said that the father was never violent, so I don't know if this is just one of those stories that he spun or if he was trying to get sympathy from people or if it was the truth. I will never kink shame someone unless your kink is murder, but sadomasochism is some people's kinks, and that's fine, as long as their partner or partners are willing participants. It makes me sad to think that this young man felt that he had to. It was said that while Cunanan was an out and proud gay man, his mother had still not accepted his sexuality and basically seemed to be in denial. I'm guessing here, but probably because she was so deeply religious in Catholicism, which makes me sad. This is a total side note, but as I have said before, I was raised Catholic, but not like extremely devout or anything. I remember going to church a lot as a kid and going through a bunch of the things that you have to. But I remember a time when I was still living in Colorado where a friend had told me that when she was younger, she had a crush on her best friend, feeling like she was in love with the girl. Then she told me when her parents found out that they basically just said no. She was confused, but that she did not love her best friend or have a crush on her. They basically forced her to take those feelings away from herself, and because she was a very deeply Catholic person herself, she was under the impression that her parents had been right and that she was just confused. She felt they were right as she is telling me this, and she was married to a man with 3 beautiful children who we just adored. But she kind of felt like she was proving to me that her parents were right. All I could think about was the fact that she was with a man who was known to have hit her on multiple occasions. And I couldn't help but sit there and think that maybe she wouldn't have ended up with a man who hit her had her parents not told her how to feel and basically pushed their religious agenda on her to the point where she had to stuff things down or stifle her own sexuality. I don't know for sure if that's the reason, but that's all I could think when she sat there and telling me like, no, my parents were right. I was just confused. It was just like, what a crappy thing to do to a child, or I think she was a teenager at the time. Like, who the fuck are you to judge or tell someone how to feel or what their own sexuality is? Ugh, assholes. Anyways, in the year of 1989, Cunanan would move to what was called the center of the LGBTQIA+ culture, the Castro district of San Francisco. By the time Cunanan was 21 years old, he was able to speak 7 languages and started gaining a taste for the wealthier lifestyle. Cunanan was still doing the same things of running in higher circles and finding wealthier, older men to support his lifestyle, and this was in San Francisco, San Diego, and in Arizona, living off one man to another. For a good 10 years, Cunanan lived the life of parties and wealthy men and was known to be a big part of the gay community. One friend would describe his laugh as being incredibly infectious, almost like a hyena's laugh. As someone with a large laugh myself that has also been called infectious, I feel that so hard that people always comment on your laugh. Like they hear a video of your voice and your laugh and they're like, man, I miss your laugh. Apparently, though, not everyone's a huge fan because my oldest son gets pissed when I laugh hard. Apparently, it's loud, and poor kid, but I can't freaking help the way I laugh, and I think all kinds of shit are funny, so I laugh a lot, and I love life, and it is what it is. In the year of 1995, Cunanan had again changed his identity to name himself Andrew D. Silva when he met a wealthy lover named Norman Blanchford, and after dating for a while, the couple would move in together. Blanchford financially supported Cunanan and gave him access to his credit cards so that Cunanan could go ahead and buy himself whatever he desired, and Norman had bought him a car as well. It would say in 1996, Norman then ended the relationship when he realized that he had been lied to and that Cunanan was not the son of a pineapple plantation owner like he claimed to be. By now, Cunanan had mostly stopped living the life of luxury that he used to when all of his quote-unquote sugar daddies no longer supported him. Professor Jackson would say that when Cunanan had reached his later 20s, he had started to realize that he was getting a little too old for the gay community party scene, and when his benefactors realized that he was a liar, they started turning their backs to him. Cunanan had started dating who he would call the love of his life in 1996, a man named David Madsen. David Madsen was an architect from Minnesota who worked at the John Ryan Company and was rising within the company, helping design commercial banking spots for grocery stores. Madsen would end up completing his master's degree in 1995 and was continually working on his thesis that was called, quote, The AIDS Memorial, a Place of Healing. Madsen was arguing there was a need for a memorial that would recognize the past of HIV and AIDS, healing in the present, and then learning in the future. Basically saying that the HIV/AIDS epidemic is ongoing and leaves lasting effects. One source would say that Madsen still lived in Minneapolis, not Minneapolis, like I apparently have a habit of saying. Yeah, I'm dumb. Moving on. So Cunanan had actually met Madsen in San Francisco during a night out on the town in '95, where a friend of Cunanan's would describe their meeting as, quote, pretty sparky in an article of Vanity Fair. The two began a long-distance relationship, and it was said that they started to experiment with S&M, which ended up being a kink of Cunanan's. It was said during the spring of 1996 that a friend had kind of urged Madsen to kind of break away from Cunanan because he was living with Norman Blanchford and still secretly keeping his relationship with Madsen. One source would say that after Norman broke up with Cunanan, that he would try to win Madsen back, but this would fail. In April of 1997, Cunanan invited Madsen for a fun and fancy San Francisco weekend, and when Cunanan tried to engage in sexual activities with Madsen rejected his advances. It would only be 2 weeks later that Cunanan would tell those around him, making a big statement of the fact that he was going to be leaving San Diego and, of course, threw himself a big going-away party. Before we move on, there is another man that we need to talk about who is named Jeffrey Trail, who was a friend of Cunanan's. Cunanan and Trail had actually met a few years before this time where Cunanan was leaving San Diego. Trail had actually graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and had been a prior naval officer. It was said that Trail and Cunanan were very close, and according to Refinery 29, Cunanan referred to Trail as his brother. There would later on be rumors of the two being romantically involved, but Trail's family continues to deny that this was ever the case. By all accounts, they seem to just be really good friends. Trail's sister Lisa would go on to say in the New York Times that if Trail got a new haircut, Cunanan had to have the exact same one. It was said that a close friend of Trail's thought that Cunanan was always sort of infatuated with Trail, but that he even seemed to find other men for Trail to hook up with. Eventually, Jeffrey Trail seemed to be distancing himself from Cunanan as well, because it was said that he was tired of all of Cunanan's quote-unquote erratic behavior and all of his lying. It was said that Trail had ended up moving to Bloomington, Minnesota for a job with a propane delivery company. This seemed to set Cunanan's jealousy off. Trail had only lived in Minnesota a few months before the declaration that Cunanan was also leaving for Minnesota. It was later pointed out that the feelings of abandonment by not only his father, his various sugar daddies, including the latest, Norman Blanchford, the rejection from Madsen, and then to top it off, his good friend Jeffrey Trail, also distancing himself and leaving, maybe led to some of the things that would happen next. The goodbye party that Cunanan had thrown himself was dubbed the Last Supper, where friends of Cunanan noticed that he was not his normal, cheerful, unabashed self. Instead, he was said to be very low-key, more reserved, and even soft-spoken, which was directly out of character for him, but people around him thought that it was kind of fitting since he was leaving the area for good, allegedly. Jeffrey Trail had now located to Minnesota where Madsen was also living. There were rumors that Trail and Madsen had met and become romantically involved, but there was never any proof of this. On April 25, 1997, Cunanan arrived at the airport in Minneapolis, where Madsen was waiting to pick him up. He told Madsen that he was going back to California that Monday, but eventually it would be found out that Cunanan had only bought a one-way ticket to Minnesota. Madsen lived in the Harmony Lofts, where both him and Cunanan would run into Jennifer Weiberg, who at the time was the caretaker for the lofts. Jennifer was being friendly with the two men when she would say that Cunanan was being non-responsive, and this seemed to irritate Madsen, she said. Her impression of Cunanan was a man with a bad attitude, and she didn't understand why anyone would like him or want to be around him. It was said that neither Jeffrey Trail nor David Madsen were really that delighted to see Cunanan in the first place. In fact, an ex-boyfriend of Madsen, Cedric Rucker, would say that Madsen was pretty tense about this visit because he believed Cunanan to be involved in organized crime after he once asked Madsen to join him in selling drugs, which Madsen refused. Cunanan had also bragged about being connected to the mob. Apparently, Madsen didn't even really want to be alone with Cunanan, but Because Madsen was known to help others and avoid confrontation, he let him stay with him. The night that Madsen had picked Cunanan up from the airport, the two went out to dinner with some of Madsen's friends, where friends of Madsen's would later say that he did seem a little uneasy at dinner. The following day, which was a Saturday, it was said that Cunanan actually stayed the night at Jeffrey Trail's house, even though Trail was out of town. He had reportedly left a key under his mat for Cunanan to let himself in to stay. On Sunday, Cunanan went back to Madsen's apartment, but had actually left a message for Trail that evening at 8 p.m. saying that he wanted to see him. That same evening, around 9:45 p.m., Trail would arrive at Madsen's apartment to visit Cunanan and Madsen. Not long after the arrival of Trail, a neighbor would later state that they overheard, quote, "Get the fuck out," followed by the sounds of someone hitting a wall, and then followed by running water. Turns out that Cunanan had actually beaten Jeffrey Trail to death with a claw hammer in front of Madsen. Jeffrey Trail's upper torso, face, and head would have 27 claw hammer blows to them, and his watch was said to have stopped around 9:55 p.m. Then, according to the author Clarkson, Cunanan had calmly rolled Trail's body up in a rug and then pushed it behind the couch as if no one was going to find it there, or maybe he just didn't care. Professor Jack Levin, who was a criminologist at Northeastern University in Boston, would go on to say that some of the spree killers who are in a sort of state of frenzy during their spree or the murders aren't really interested in hiding the body of their victims. Maybe they don't even think about it when they're in that state and they're not clear-minded. That's fucking scary. Okay, so after the murder of Trail, both Madsen and Cunanan were said to be holed up in the apartment with the dead body for 2 days and didn't really seem to have a plan of what to do with the body. The day after Trail's murder, there would be a neighbor who saw the two men walking Madsen's dog, and one source would say that Madsen had clearly been crying and that Cunanan was chatting at him fairly fast. After the 2 days, Cunanan had allegedly convinced Madsen to run away with him, where one source would say that they were headed to Mexico, but unfortunately, they would not make it there. After the news came out about the spree killings of Cunanan, many people had questioned why Madsen would go along with what Cunanan had said or did after the murder of Trail. There are a few explanations as to why he may have. One being that he didn't even have time to process what had just happened and could have been in sort of a state of shock. In an article of Vanity Fair, Greg McCrary, who was a senior consultant of the Threat Assessment Group for former supervisory special agent of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, said that Cunanan had some influence over Madsen to some degree, being like the Stockholm Syndrome. He would further say that sexually sadistic offenders who have this level of control over people, it's usually out of plain fear. People like Cunanan, who had such strong interpersonal skills, can easily target and manipulate their victims, and usually because the offenders can understand and fulfill their victims' needs, they almost feel obligated. This could be why Madsen didn't turn Cunanan in, but instead left with him. Later on, in Madsen's residence, there would be found over 50 letters and postcards from Cunanan to Madsen, where Cunanan was clearly not living in reality. He would lie and pretend to be on different trips that he never went to, but it did outline a very special relationship between Madsen and Cunanan. A few days after the murder of Trail, Jennifer, the caretaker of the Harmony Lofts, had gotten 2 separate voicemails from some of David Madsen's co-workers, who were concerned that Madsen hadn't shown up for work. Jennifer went to look for him, knocked with no answer, where she would then pull out her master key and walked into the apartment. She would later say that it was horrifying. Madsen and Cunanan are now on the run. On May 2nd in Rush City, Minnesota, an officer from the county sheriff's office would get a phone call from dispatch asking for him to go meet 2 local fishermen that had been out scouting a particular area so that they could later go back and put up a tent and fish the following weekend when they would spot what they thought was a body down in the water. After the authorities would put the word out that they had a deceased white male with the description of the victim to other local authorities in case anyone had a missing person matching this description, they would unfortunately get some feedback that they had been missing a man that fits this description from Minneapolis. This was the body of David Madsen. Authorities would later piece together what they believe happened leading up to the death of Madsen. They believed the vehicle that Cunanan and Madsen were in was driven to the lake and backed into some brush where the two would get out and talk. They then believed that Madsen realized at some point that something bad was about to happen, so he tried to run. Cunanan would then shoot Madsen in the back, where he would fall onto the ground in front of him. And this is sadly when Cunanan would shoot him again. There is some misinformation out there about the exact day or time that Madsen was killed, with the autopsy saying that he was dead about a week when he was found, and some witnesses coming forward thinking that they saw Madsen and Cunanan together, but some being false. I don't know. Either way, one thing they know for sure is that Madsen's Jeep, that was red, was found to be parked in a Chicago parking garage on Wednesday, April 30th, and this was about 3 days before Madsen's body would be found. Madsen's family is under the belief that Madsen walked into the room while Cunanan was in the process of killing Trail, and they believed that Cunanan took Madsen as hostage because of what he had witnessed. After Madsen's body was then found by the fishermen, authorities could see that he had been shot with 40 cal Golden Saber bullets, and he had been shot 3 times with a gun that was actually owned by Jeffrey Trail. Cunanan sadly shot Madsen once in the back, the head, and the face. It's so sad. They didn't do anything wrong. They did not deserve this. On May 4th, 1997, so just 2 days after Madsen's body was found, a Chicago real estate tycoon named Lee Miglin was found under a car parked in the garage of his mansion, brutally murdered. When Miglin was found, no one knew who his killer or killers were and believed that he may not even have known. Miglin was sadly found with, quote, his throat slashed, ear to ear, and his feet bound with masking tape, end quote. The ME's office of Cook County would say that Miglin's clothing had been completely drenched in blood. However, something interesting was that the area the body was found in was actually clean, which could mean that someone had moved the body. Miglin's wife was known as a Home Shopping Network host and dubbed the Queen of Makeovers. Marilyn had gotten home from a business trip earlier that morning and she couldn't find her husband. She only found a handgun in the bathroom, but it would later be found out that that gun was not real. It was a replica. Marilyn would call 911 and report her husband had been missing, and she also said a vehicle of theirs had been stolen out of the garage, a 1994 green Lexus. The authorities would later say they believed that Miglin was murdered the day before, somewhere between 2 and 5 p.m. Witnesses who had seen Miglin that day said that he was in good spirits and looking forward to upcoming trips. It was not known who would have attacked Miglin in such a horrific way, but the first theory put out there about what may have happened was built from the crime scene. Investigators theorized that Miglin may have parked his Lexus in one garage and then walked across the alleyway headed towards his back gate when someone could have stuck a gun in his back. At the time, of course, Miglin would have thought that this was a real loaded gun because, yeah, why wouldn't you? That's terrifying. Then the suspect may have ordered Miglin into his other garage, and this is where they believe that Miglin was nearly decapitated. And it's believed the weapon was a pair of pruning shears that were 5 feet long that they would later find in the garage. Holy shit, I had no idea that pruning shears came that big. And also, oh my god, what a horrific way to die. Fuck. They would later say that Miglin was covered with a plastic bag with some masking tape around his throat. The ME would later find no defensive wounds on Miglin, and there seemed to be a cut in the bag so that Miglin could breathe. So here's my thought, though. If he was nearly decapitated, why would he need a hole to breathe? Or do they think that he was wrapped first and then almost decapitated? I wondered if the cut on the bag was on accident with like the shears or whatever was around, or even maybe when he moved the body. Something that struck the authorities as odd and is just so creepy is that the police saw that the suspect had eaten some ham in the refrigerator and also left behind a half-eaten apple before presumably stealing the Lexus. Oh, the picture of the ham is so freaking creepy. Who does that? I guess it does happen, but it just freaks me out to think that someone could do something so horrific and then just go eat like nothing had happened. It was speculated by a criminologist that Miglin's murder was different than the others and that he was tortured on purpose. And there was a major overkill to his body. Seemingly the killer was getting joy from it. I wanted to share a little bit about the victim, Lee Miglin, to honor his memory. He was born in 1924 in Illinois to a Lithuanian immigrant coal miner. He was first a salesman in Chicago, and then Miglin was credited for the concept of redesigning the areas of old warehouses into upscale business parks. And when he was murdered, he had already developed multiple high-rise buildings in Chicago, managing 22 million square feet of retail and office space. Miglin was also known for being a philanthropist, which, if you aren't exactly sure what that means, because I thought I did, but I wasn't 100% sure, it means someone who wants to help others and can be generous in their donations to promote the welfare of others. Mr. and Mrs. Miglin were known for fundraising, and Lee Miglin was known to help fundraise for the University of Chicago Medical Center and the Museum of Science and Industry. A man after my own heart who aims to do good with his wealth, not only by helping others, but furthering medicinal resources and museums of science. Good for him, and fuck Andrew Cunanan for taking this wonderful human away from the rest of us. The link for this case to change from a random killer to Andrew Cunanan came from the SUV that was parked not far from Miglin's home for many days, and it was noted that it had Minnesota license plates and was registered, of course, to David Madsen, who had been found dead just the day before Miglin was found. Cunanan was on the run again after having killed Miglin, but this time, the police would not be far behind him because he was dumb enough to use the Lexus's car phone, which means the authorities could track it. May 9th, 1997 in Pennsville, New Jersey, now 756 miles away from Chicago, in a place called Finns Point National Cemetery, where many Civil War veterans were buried, Cunanan would ask a man for a glass of water. William Reese, or Bill as he was known to loved ones, worked at Finns Point, where on May 9th, he had been locking up for the day when a man would approach him, saying that he wasn't feeling so well and asked for a glass of water. Bill, being the stand-up man that he was, invited Cunanan in to help him and give him some water, but within seconds of being inside, Cunanan would pull out the gun on him, presumably Jeffrey Trail's gun that he still had, and he would shoot and kill Bill on the spot. This would take place in what looked like a basement of the caretaker's home, maybe, on the video that I watched from Absolute Crime. On the same video, Bill's brother-in-law, Craig, would speak about Bill's good-natured personality. Craig said that it had been, at this time, about 16 years since it had happened, and it was still hard for him to talk about. He clearly loved his brother-in-law very much, and it was so moving to listen to him speak about Bill. He would say that Bill was a family man and loved them so much, and his family loved him back. He said there is now a huge void in their family. Bill was known to do Civil War reenactments, which I have always wanted to see one of those, or any kind of reenactment. I wonder what that's like. Have you ever seen one? Let me know. So, in the death of Bill, there was no torture, just murder. Professor Jackson said that it is possible that Cunanan was changing his modus operandi to try and now throw agents off who were hunting him down. It was said that after killing Bill, Cunanan would steal Bill's red Chevy pickup and flee. From New Jersey, Cunanan would make his way down to South Carolina, where he would stop to replace the license plates on the stolen truck with different stolen plates. And then Cunanan made his way to Miami. It was said that on Thursday, June 12th of 1997, Andrew Cunanan would be added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. No one at the time knew where he was. Not only did Cunanan blend in with the crowd, being so unassuming, but he was also able to change the way he looked very easily, and that threw investigators off. After the shooting of Gianni Versace on June 15th, the authorities would find the red Chevy truck that Cunanan had stolen from Bill Reese parked not far from Versace's mansion, and they would find bloody clothing nearby. While the authorities were wondering if Cunanan had taken off again or if he had decided to stay in Miami, witnesses would come forward with sightings of Cunanan in Miami near Palm Beach in the few weeks before the murder. Professor Jackson would share his thoughts that Cunanan maybe killed Versace because Cunanan was self-loathing and wanted to take his anger out on the LGBTQIA+ community that he was so angry towards and had suddenly turned against, and maybe Cunanan wanted to take his anger out on a symbol of the gay community, which Versace could have been to him. The Miami community, as well as others, were afraid of Cunanan, wondering if this was an isolated incident or if he was still out there on a killing spree. Many people in the area who identified as gay were afraid for their own lives, worried that Cunanan could just be targeting random gay people to kill out of anger. In what would end up being a 3-month killing spree that would span over 2,000 miles, a giant manhunt would ensue for Cunanan. A lifeguard at a local beach, a man named Andy Limburg, said he was working one day when the beach was empty. Not many people were out and around, and he saw one man sitting on the rail, and this man was staring at Andy for what he said was a good 15 or 20 minutes, which is a long fucking time. It got to the point where Andy opened the window of the lifeguard tower and said, quote, "You got a freaking problem?" which he chuckled about when he recanted it. He would then say later that night he went home and saw the same man on Channel 7 News, except the guy that he had seen had a shaved head. So he knew that he looked a little different now than what the pictures were showing on the news. On Wednesday, July 23rd, 1997, on Ocean Drive, a caretaker, Fernando Carrera, had stopped to take a quick look at a houseboat that was vacant and docked at a place called Indian Creek, which is about 2.5 miles from the Versace mansion. When he went inside, he found Cunanan had been staying there, and it was said as Fernando fled to call or tell the police, a shot rang out. The authorities surrounded the houseboat very quickly. Criminologists would say that this was thought to be Cunanan's last stand, and maybe he didn't think that the authorities would ever find him since he had gotten away with it so far. I got the impression that it was a surprise to authorities that Cunanan was still found in Miami. I'm sure that they thought that he was running as he had every time before. As the authorities closed in on the houseboat that I can only describe as looking like a 90s dollhouse, you guys, I have never seen a houseboat like this before. It was like a light blue colored box and it had like frills and it had a balcony on the second floor. It was really something to see. I will post pictures of it on the TheKillFile socials this week, so look out for those. When the authorities had gotten close enough to get Cunanan, they threw tear gas into the houseboat. There were now hundreds of people all over the place, from police to reporters to news crews, trying to get a shot of what was going on. When the authorities entered the houseboat, they would find Andrew Cunanan dead, as the shot that Fernando heard was Cunanan shooting himself in the right side of his head. Professor Jack Levin believes that Cunanan may have been on a suicidal rampage the entire time, but that he wanted to take out some people that he was angry with first. People who knew Andrew Cunanan said that he was over the top in every way, from his personality to the way he killed, and needed to be the center of attention at all times. I will leave you with the quote from Cunanan's high school yearbook, in which he said, quote, "Après moi le déluge," sorry if I butchered that, which translated means, quote, "After me, the storm." And that, my friends, is the story of spree murderer Andrew Cunanan, a man who could have went on to be a brilliant gay icon, but instead became a stain on the history of this country. This guy, am I right? It makes me so mad when someone is born into somewhat more privilege than most. Like, I understand that they had kind of a modest living, but in an area that was a lot better than most, and he had multiple opportunities given to him, and then people like that just fuck it all up with their stupid bullshit of just needing the most attention and thinking that they're better than most. I mean, he could have finished college, he was so smart, and he could have gotten a fucking job instead of mooching off wealthy older men, and he could have been this amazing icon for the gay community. But nope, he was a shitbag. I have to blame just a little bit on his parents. I understand they did what they thought was best, and I'm not trying to parent shame. There is no one way to parent. I'm definitely not perfect myself. But being this subservient type of parent who teaches their son that social status is so important and then caters to him, it really doesn't surprise me that he ended up being a man with seemingly low self-worth, which seemed to be intertwined with his good looks and sexuality. It makes me sad for the younger version of Andrew that he was raised maybe not in the best way to make him successful and independent. What a shame. But who I feel the most bad for are all of his victims who did not deserve what happened to them. These poor men who were just out there living their lives, some of which tried to be his friend, or like Bill who tried to help him, and he just took his anger and his stupid bullshit out on random people after killing 2 people he allegedly loved in one way or another. What a huge piece of shit, and what a fucked up thing to do, man. You will not be missed, I promise. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's case, and I hope to see you guys back next Monday when we will cover another case here on The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye! Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help The Kill File and other true crime lovers find us. Also, check out the website at thekillfile.com to suggest a case. Find our merch shop for fun Kill File gear, which you can also find at thekillfile.printify.me and help support the podcast. Have a suggestion or want to share your own true crime stories? Email thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com for a chance to get them read on the podcast. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, X, Blue X, TikTok, and of course, you can subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. We are either listed as The Kill File or The Kill File Podcast. Come on back Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case here on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.